The old bus made a loud noise as it stopped. Sarah Martinez looked out the dirty window and saw a small town that looked like something from an old movie. She picked up her worn backpack from the floor. It held everything she owned now. In her pocket, she had $47 and some coins. That was all the money she had left in the world. Sarah got off the bus slowly. The hot Texas sun hit her face right away. The bus driver pulled her small suitcase from under the bus and set it down on the dusty ground. He looked at her with worry in his eyes. "You sure this is where you want to be, miss?" he asked. "This town ain't much to look at," Sarah nodded, even though her heart was beating fast. "Yes, this is right, thank you." The bus drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind it. Sarah stood alone on the empty street. She looked around at Dusthart, Texas. The name of the town was painted on a faded sign that looked very old. Some of the letters were missing. The main street had old buildings. On both sides, most of them needed paint. Some windows were broken and covered with boards. There was a small bank, a hardware store, and what looked like a diner. A few pickup trucks were parked in front of the buildings. She could see men wearing cowboy hats sitting on chairs outside the hardware store. They were all looking at her. Sarah had never felt so alone in her life. 3 weeks ago, she had a job at a marketing company in Dallas. She had a small apartment and friends from college. Then the company said they had to let people go. Sarah was one of the first to lose her job because she was new. She tried to find another job in the city, but no one was hiring. Her money ran out fast. She could not pay rent, so she had to move out of her apartment. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was in high school, so she had no family to help her. Her college friends all had their own problems and could not help much. One day, Sarah heard an old man at the unemployment office talking about small towns that needed workers. He said these towns were so small that they would hire anyone who wanted to work hard. Sarah did not have any other choice, so she bought a bus ticket to the smallest town she could find on the map. Now she was here in Dusthart, and it looked even smaller than she thought it would be. She picked up her suitcase and started walking down the main street. The men in cowboy hats stopped talking when she walked by. They just watched her with curious eyes. Sarah's college degree felt useless now. She had studied business and marketing, but what good was that in a place like this? She needed any kind of work just to eat and have a place to sleep. The diner looked like the friendliest place on the street. It had a sign that said, "Betty's Diner," in red letters. Through the window, she could see people eating and talking. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed open the door. A bell rang when she walked in. Everyone in the diner turned to look at her. Sarah felt her face turn red, but she kept walking. The diner was small but clean. It had old red chairs and white tables. Pictures of cowboys and cattle hung on the walls. A woman with gray hair and a kind face came over to her. She was wearing an apron and had a name tag that said Betty. "Well, hello there, honey," Betty said with a warm smile. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. "I just got off the bus." "I can see that. You look tired and hungry. Why don't you sit down and I'll get you something to eat?" Sarah sat down at a table near the window. Betty brought her a glass of cold water and a menu. The prices were much lower than what Sarah was used to in the city. That was good because she did not have much money. "What brings you to our little town?" Betty asked as she filled Sarah's water glass again. Sarah looked around the diner. The other people were still watching her, but they were trying not to be obvious about it. She could hear them talking quietly to each other. "I'm looking for work," Sarah said. She felt embarrassed to say it, but she had to be honest. "I lost my job in Dallas, and I heard that small towns sometimes need workers." Betty's face got serious. She sat down across from Sarah. "Honey, I have to tell you the truth. This town is dying. We don't have much work here for anyone, especially for young people like you." Sarah's heart sank, but she did not give up. "I'll do anything," she said. "I can clean, I can cook a little, I can work with computers. I just need a chance." Betty looked at Sarah for a long time. She saw something in the young woman's eyes that reminded her of herself many years ago. When Betty was young, she had come to this town with nothing. Her husband had died, and she needed to start over. The people of Dustheart had given her a chance, and she had been grateful ever since. "Well," Betty said slowly, "I suppose I could use some help here in the diner, but I can't pay much and you'd have to work hard." Sarah felt tears come to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I'll work as hard as you need me to, I promise." "The job comes with a small room upstairs," Betty said. "It's not much, but it's clean and safe. You get your meals here, too." Sarah could not believe her luck. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Betty. You won't be sorry." Betty smiled. "Just call me Betty, honey, and we'll see how it goes. This town has a way of testing people. Some folks can handle it, and some can't." That evening, Betty showed Sarah to her new room. It was small but clean, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the main street. Sarah put her few things in the dresser and sat on the bed. She looked out the window at the quiet street. A few people were walking around, and she could see lights on in some of the buildings. It was so different from the city. There were no cars honking, no sirens, no crowds of people. Just quiet. Sarah thought about her journey to this place. A week ago, she never would have imagined that she would be living in a tiny room above a diner in a small Texas town. But here she was, and for the first time in weeks, she felt hope. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she had a job and a place to sleep. That was more than she had yesterday. Maybe this little town could give her the fresh start she needed. Maybe she could make a life here, even if it was not the life she had planned. Outside her window, the stars were brighter than any she had ever seen in the city. Sarah made a wish on the brightest star she could find. She wished for the strength to work hard and the wisdom to make good choices. She wished for a chance to prove that she belonged here. As she got ready for bed, Sarah felt nervous but excited about her first day of work tomorrow. She did not know that her simple question about work would change not just her life, but the life of everyone in Dustheart, Texas. Sarah woke up before the sun came up. She could hear Betty moving around downstairs in the kitchen. The smell of coffee and bacon was coming through the floor. Sarah got dressed quickly and went downstairs to start her first day of work. Betty was already cooking breakfast for the early customers. She smiled when she saw Sarah. "Good morning, honey. Ready to work?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said. She was nervous but excited. Betty showed Sarah how everything worked in the diner. She learned where the plates and cups were kept, how to use the coffee machine, and how to take orders. The work was not hard, but it was different from anything Sarah had done before. The first customers came in at 6 in the morning. They were ranch workers who needed breakfast before they went out to work with the cattle. They were big men with rough hands and cowboy boots. At first, they seemed surprised to see a young woman they did not know. "Who's the new girl, Betty?" asked one man with a gray mustache. "This is Sarah," Betty said. "She's going to be helping me out." The men nodded politely, but Sarah could tell they were curious about her. She tried to do her job well and not make mistakes. By the end of the first week, the customers were getting used to her. As Sarah worked, she started to learn about the town and its problems. She listened to the customers talk while they ate their meals. What she heard made her worried about her new home. The biggest employer in town was the Morrison Ranch. It was run by a man named Jake Morrison, whose family had owned the land for more than 100 years. But the ranch was having trouble making money. The price of cattle was low, and the cost of everything else was high. "Jake's been trying to keep that ranch going for 10 years now," she heard one customer say, "but it's getting harder every year." "My boy graduated high school last month," said another man. "He's already talking about moving to Houston to find work. There's nothing here for young people." Sarah learned that many of the town's businesses were closing. The hardware store was barely staying open. The owner, Mr. Peterson, was 70 years old and wanted to retire. But no one wanted to buy his store. The bank was thinking about closing its branch in Dustheart. If that happened, people would have to drive 50 miles to the next town to do their banking. The post office was also in danger of closing because there were not enough people in town to make it worth keeping open. "This town has been dying for 20 years, Betty told Sarah one evening after they closed the diner. "When I first came here, we had 2,000 people. Now we have less than 800. Sarah asked why people were leaving. "No jobs," Betty said sadly. "The young people finish school and leave right away. The older people retire and move to bigger towns where there are more doctors and stores. The only people left are the ones who can't leave or won't leave." Sarah started to understand why the people in town looked so worried all the time. They loved their home, but they could see it disappearing little by little. One morning, Jake Morrison came into the diner for breakfast. Sarah had heard a lot about him, but this was the first time she had seen him. He was a tall man with dark hair and serious eyes. He looked tired, like he had been working too hard for too long. Jake sat at the counter and ordered coffee and eggs. Sarah served him, trying not to seem too interested. But she was curious about the man who owned the biggest ranch in the area. "You're the new girl," Jake said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir, I'm Sarah." Jake nodded and went back to eating his breakfast. He did not talk much, but Sarah could see that he was thinking about something that worried him. Later, Sarah heard Jake talking to another rancher at a table near the back of the diner. "I don't know how much longer I can keep going," Jake said quietly. "The bank is asking questions about my loan. If I can't make the payments, I'll lose everything my family built." The other rancher shook his head. "It's the same for all of us, Jake. We're selling our cattle for less than it costs to raise them." Sarah felt sad when she heard this. These men worked so hard, but they could not make enough money to live on. It did not seem fair. As the weeks went by, Sarah saw more problems in the town. The school was talking about combining with a school in another town because there were not enough students. The fire department was all volunteers, and many of them were getting too old to do the job. The worst part was watching the hope leave people's eyes. Sarah could see that many of them had given up. They were just waiting for the town to die completely, but Sarah had not given up. She had grown to love Dust Heart and the people who lived there. The customers at the diner had become like family. To her, Betty treated her like a daughter. Even the men who had seemed unfriendly at first were now kind to her. Sarah started to think about the business classes she had taken in college. Her professors had taught her about marketing and finding new customers. Maybe some of those ideas could help Dust Heart. One evening, Sarah was walking down the main street when she met Mrs. Henderson, who owned the flower shop. Mrs. Henderson was locking up her store for the day. "Business slow today?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Henderson sighed. "Business is slow every day, dear. I only stay open because I don't know what else to do with myself." Sarah looked at the beautiful flowers in the window. "Your flowers are lovely." "Do you grow them yourself?" "Some of them. I have a little greenhouse behind the store." Sarah had an idea, but she did not say anything yet. She needed to think about it more. That night, Sarah sat in her room and wrote down all the problems she had observed in Dust Heart. The list was long. No jobs for young people. Businesses closing, people moving away. The ranch losing money, but then Sarah made another list. This one was about the good things she had seen. The town had beautiful land with wide open spaces. The people were honest and hardworking. The ranch produced excellent beef. There were skilled craftsmen like Mr. Peterson who knew how to fix anything. Sarah started to wonder if the problem was not that Dust Heart had nothing to offer. Maybe the problem was that people outside the town did not know what Dust Heart had to offer. She thought about the ranchers selling their cattle for low prices to big companies. Those companies then sold the beef to restaurants and stores for much higher prices. What if the ranchers could sell directly to the customers who wanted good beef? Sarah also thought about city people who wanted to experience life in the country. They paid a lot of money to go to fancy resorts that pretended to be like real ranch life. But Dust Heart had the real thing. These ideas excited Sarah, but she knew she had to be careful. The people of Dust Heart were proud and independent. They would not want an outsider telling them how to run their lives. Sarah had only been in town for a few weeks. She needed to earn their trust first. Sarah decided to watch and learn more before she said anything about her ideas. She needed to understand the town better. She needed to show people that she cared about Dusthart and wanted to help, not just make changes for the sake of changing things, but deep inside, Sarah was starting to believe that this little town could be saved. It would not be easy, and it would take time. But maybe, just maybe, she could help the people of Dusthart find a way to keep their home alive. After 2 months in Dusthart, Sarah felt like she was finally starting to belong. She knew the names of all the regular customers at the diner. She knew that Mr. Johnson liked his coffee black and his eggs over easy. She knew that Mrs. Garcia always ordered the same thing, a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup. She knew that young Tommy Miller would come in after school and Betty would give him a free cookie if he showed her his homework. The people of the town were beginning to trust Sarah. At first, they had been polite but careful around her. They were not used to outsiders, especially young women from the city, but Sarah worked hard every day and never complained. She was always on time, always friendly, and always willing to help. Betty was especially pleased with Sarah. "You're a natural at this work, honey," she told Sarah one afternoon. "And the customers like you. That's important in a small town." Sarah had learned that in a place like Dusthart, being liked was just as important as being good at your job. People wanted to do business with folks they could trust. They wanted to know that you cared about them as people, not just as customers. Every day, Sarah listened to the stories that the customers told. She learned about their families, their worries, and their dreams. She heard about the good times when the town was bigger and busier. She heard about the hard times when drought made the ranching difficult and when young people moved away to find better jobs. Jake Morrison came to the diner 3 or 4 times a week. He usually sat alone at the counter and did not talk much. But Sarah could see that he was a good man who cared deeply about his ranch and his workers. She could also see that he was under a lot of stress. One morning, Jake looked especially tired when he came in for breakfast. His clothes were dirty and he had scratches on his hands. "Rough night?" Sarah asked as she poured his coffee. Jake nodded. "One of my cows got stuck in the mud by the creek. Took 4 of us 3 hours to get her out. Is she okay?" "She be fine, but I lost a whole night's sleep, and I have 100 other things to do today." Sarah could hear the frustration in his voice. She wanted to help, but she did not know how. She was just a waitress who did not know anything about ranching, but Sarah was a good listener, and she was starting to understand the challenges that Jake and the other ranchers faced. They worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. They had to take care of hundreds of cattle, fix broken fences, maintain equipment, and handle all the business side of running a ranch. The hardest part was that they were not making much money for all their hard work. The big meat companies paid low prices for cattle, and the ranchers had no choice but to accept those prices. They could not sell their cattle anywhere else, because they did not have the connections or the knowledge to find different buyers. Sarah started to pay attention to other businesses in town too. Mr. Peterson's hardware store was full of interesting old tools and equipment. Some of the tools were handmade and looked like they belonged in a museum. But Mr. Peterson sold them for very low prices because he thought nobody wanted old things anymore. Mrs. Henderson's flower shop had the most beautiful flowers Sarah had ever seen. Mrs. Henderson grew many of them herself in a greenhouse behind her store. She made lovely arrangements for weddings and funerals, but there were not many of those events in a town as small as Dusthart. There was also an old man named Charlie who made furniture in a workshop behind his house. Sarah had seen some of his work when she helped deliver food to his house when he was sick. Charlie made beautiful tables and chairs from wood that came from trees on his own land. But he only made furniture when people in town needed it, which was not very often. All of these people had skills and products that Sarah thought were special. In the city, people paid a lot of money for handmade furniture, organic flowers, and antique tools. But here in Dusthart, these things were not valued because people thought city folks only wanted modern, Factory-made products. Sarah began to realize that the people of Dust Heart did not see how valuable their work really was. They had been told for so long that their way of life was old-fashioned and not important that they believed it themselves, but Sarah saw things differently. She had lived in the city, and she knew what people there were looking for. City people were tired of buying things that were made in factories by machines. They wanted products that were made by real people who cared about their work. They wanted to support small businesses and local communities. Sarah also noticed that many people in the city were interested in country life but did not know how to experience it. They went to expensive resorts that tried to look like ranches, but were really just fancy hotels. What if they could come to a real ranch and see how real cowboys lived and worked? These ideas excited Sarah, but she knew she had to be very careful about how she shared them. The people of Dust Heart were proud of their independence. They did not want someone from the outside coming in and telling them how to change their lives. Sarah decided to start small. When customers at the diner talked about their problems, she asked questions that might help them think of new solutions. She did not give advice directly. Instead, she asked things like, "Have you ever thought about selling your beef to restaurants in the city? Or do you think people would pay extra for handmade furniture?" Some people were interested in these questions. Others thought Sarah was being silly. "City people don't want anything we have here," said one rancher. "They want everything fast and cheap." But Sarah did not give up. She kept listening and learning. She started to understand the history of the town and why people thought the way they did. Dust Heart had been built by people who were tough and independent. They had survived droughts, economic problems, and many other challenges by depending on themselves and each other. The problem was that the world had changed around them. The old ways of doing business were not working anymore. But the people of Dust Heart did not know how to change without losing the things that made their community special. Sarah began to see that her job was not to change the people of Dust Heart. Her job was to help them find new ways to share their existing strengths with the world outside their town. One evening, Sarah was cleaning tables after the dinner rush when Jake Morrison came in. The diner was almost empty, and he sat down at his usual spot at the counter. "Coffee?" Sarah asked. "Please," Jake said. He looked tired, but not as stressed as usual. As Sarah poured his coffee, Jake said, "Betty tells me you're from Dallas." "Yes, sir, I worked there before I came here." "What kind of work did you do?" Sarah was surprised that Jake was asking about her past. He had never shown much interest in talking to her before. "I worked for a marketing company," Sarah said. "We helped businesses find new customers." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Must be different from working in a diner." "Different, yes, but I like it here. The people are real. In the city, everything felt fake somehow." Jake looked at Sarah with new interest. "You really like it here? Even though there's not much excitement?" Sarah smiled. "There's more excitement here than you might think. Every day I learn something new about ranching or farming or how things work in a small town. And the people here care about each other in a way that people in the city don't." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Most young people can't wait to leave this place." "Maybe they just need to see it differently," Sarah said carefully. "Sometimes when you're too close to something, you can't see how special it really is." Jake finished his coffee and left money on the counter. As he was leaving, he turned back to Sarah. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe we all need to look at things differently." After Jake left, Sarah felt hopeful. Maybe she was finally starting to earn the trust of the people who mattered in this town. Maybe they were beginning to see that she truly cared about Dust Heart and wanted to help it succeed. Sarah was learning that change in a small town happened slowly. People needed time to get used to new ideas, but she was patient and she was determined. She believed that Dust Heart had everything it needed to survive and thrive. She just needed to help people see that for themselves. Sarah had been working at the diner for 3 months when she overheard a conversation that gave her an idea. Jake Morrison was sitting with 2 other ranchers, talking about the price they were getting for their cattle. "The meat company is offering even less this year," Jake said, shaking his head. I'm barely breaking even after I pay for feed and other costs. Same here, said Bill Crawford, who owned a smaller ranch outside town. I'm thinking about selling some of my land. I can't keep losing money like this. Sarah was wiping down tables nearby, but she was listening carefully. She had been thinking about this problem for weeks. These ranchers raised excellent cattle on good land, but they were not getting paid what their beef was worth. That evening, Sarah stayed late at the diner to help Betty with the books. As they worked, Sarah asked Betty about the meat company that bought cattle from the local ranchers. That's Texas Beef Corporation, Betty said. They've been buying cattle here for 20 years. They take the cattle to their processing plant, then sell the meat to stores and restaurants all over the country. Do you know how much they sell the meat for? Sarah asked. Betty shrugged. A lot more than they pay our ranchers, I'm sure. But what choice do the ranchers have? Texas Beef is the only company that will come out here to buy cattle. Sarah went to bed that night thinking about what Betty had said. The next day was her day off, so she drove to the library in the next town. She wanted to do some research. At the library, Sarah used the computer to look up information about beef prices. What she found shocked her. The restaurants in Dallas were paying 4 times more for beef than what Jake and the other ranchers were getting from Texas Beef Corporation. Sarah also learned that many restaurants were looking for locally raised grass-fed beef. City people were willing to pay extra for meat that came from small ranches where the cattle were treated well. Sarah printed out some of the information she found and drove back to Dusthart. She was excited, but she knew she had to be careful about how she approached Jake with her idea. The next morning, Jake came into the diner for breakfast as usual. Sarah served him coffee and waited for the right moment to talk to him. Mr. Morrison, she said when the diner was not busy, could I ask you something about your cattle? Jake looked surprised. What about them? Well, I was wondering if you ever thought about selling your beef directly to restaurants instead of to the meat company. Jake frowned. What do you mean? Sarah sat down across from him. I did some research at the library. Restaurants in Dallas are paying much higher prices for good beef than what you're getting from Texas Beef Corporation. I'm sure they are, Jake said, but how would I sell to restaurants? I don't know any restaurant owners, and I don't have time to drive all over the state trying to make deals. What if there was a way to connect with those restaurants without leaving your ranch? Sarah asked. What if you could show them pictures of your cattle and your land and tell them the story of how you raise your beef? Jake was quiet for a moment. You're talking about the internet. Yes, sir. A simple website and maybe some social media. I could help you set it up? Jake shook his head. I don't know anything about computers and websites, and I don't have money to pay someone to do all that. You wouldn't have to pay me, Sarah said quickly. I learned how to do this stuff in college. It would be practice for me. Jake looked at Sarah like she was crazy. Why would you do that for free? Sarah took a deep breath. Because I care about this town, and I want to see it succeed. If your ranch does better, it's good for everyone here. Jake was quiet for a long time. Sarah could see that he was thinking hard about what she had said. Finally, Jake said, What exactly would this website thing do? Sarah pulled out the paper she had printed at the library. Look at these prices. This restaurant in Dallas pays $20 a pound for grass-fed beef. You're probably getting $5 a pound from Texas Beef. Jake's eyes got wide when he saw the numbers. That can't be right. It is right. And look at this. Sarah showed him another page. This website helps small farms connect directly with restaurants. They have a whole section for grass-fed beef from Texas ranches. Jake studied the papers carefully. Sarah could see that he was starting to get interested. Even if this works, Jake said, how would I get the meat to restaurants in Dallas? That's a long drive. There are companies that deliver food to restaurants, Sarah said. Or the restaurants might send their own trucks if they're buying enough meat. Jake was quiet. Again, then he said, If I did this, what would I need to do? Sarah felt excited, but she tried to stay calm. First, we would take pictures of your ranch and your cattle. Good pictures that show how beautiful your land is and how healthy your animals are. Then we would write a story about your family and how long you've been ranching here. A story. People want to know where their food comes from, Sarah explained. They want to feel connected to the farmer or rancher who raised it. Your family has been on this land for over 100 years. That's a story that people will find interesting. Jake thought about this. My great-grandfather started this ranch. In 1895, my grandfather and my father both worked this same land. That's exactly the kind of story that would appeal to restaurants, Sarah said. They want to tell their customers that they're serving beef from a real Texas ranch with a real history. Jake finished his coffee and stood up. Let me think about this, he said. It sounds too good to be true. I understand, Sarah said, but what do you have to lose? If it doesn't work, you're no worse off than you are now. Over the next few days, Jake came to the diner more often than usual. Each time, he asked Sarah more questions about her idea. He wanted to know how much time it would take, what kinds of pictures they would need, and how they would find restaurants that might be interested. Sarah answered all his questions patiently. She could see that Jake was warming up to the idea, but he was still scared of trying something so different. Finally, on a Friday morning, Jake came into the diner and said, "Okay, let's try it." Sarah smiled so big that her cheeks hurt. Really? Really? But I want to start small. If this doesn't work out, I don't want to look like a fool in front of the whole town. We'll start very small, Sarah promised. And just a simple website and maybe a Facebook page. That weekend, Sarah borrowed Betty's camera and drove out to the Morrison Ranch. It was her first time seeing the ranch up close, and she was amazed by how beautiful it was. The ranch covered thousands of acres of rolling hills covered with green grass. Cattle grazed peacefully under the wide Texas sky. The main house was old but well-maintained, with a big front porch that looked out over the pastures. Jake showed Sarah around the ranch and told her about how he raised his cattle. He explained that his cattle ate only grass, not the corn that most cattle were fed. He showed her the creek where the cattle drank clean water, and the fields where he grew hay for the winter. Sarah took hundreds of pictures. She photographed the cattle, the land, the old barns, and Jake working with his animals. She could see that Jake was proud of his ranch, even though he was worried about the business side of things. That evening, Sarah went back to her room and started working on Jake's website. She wrote about the history of the Morrison Ranch and the Morrison family. She described how the cattle were raised on open pastures with clean water and fresh grass. She explained that this was the same land that Jake's great-grandfather had chosen more than 100 years ago. Sarah worked late into the night, choosing the best pictures and writing the story of the ranch. When she was finished, she had created something that looked professional but still felt personal and real. The next week, Sarah showed the website to Jake. He was amazed by what she had created. "This makes my ranch look like something special." He said, "Your ranch is something special," Sarah replied. "I just helped other people see what I see when I look at it." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do we find restaurants that might want to buy from us?" Sarah smiled. "Leave that to me." 3 weeks after Jake's website went live, he got his first order. A restaurant in Austin wanted to buy 50 pounds of grass-fed beef. The price they offered was 3 times what Texas Beef Corporation usually paid. Jake called Sarah at the diner, and she could hear the excitement in his voice. "It worked," he said. "A restaurant actually wants to buy my beef." Word spread quickly through Dust Heart. By the end of the day, everyone in town knew that Jake Morrison had sold beef directly to a restaurant for a much higher price than usual. The next morning, Jake came into the diner with a big smile on his face. "I owe you a thank you," he told Sarah. "And maybe some free beef," Sarah laughed. "I'm just glad it worked, but this is only the beginning. One restaurant is great, but you need more customers to really make a difference." Over the next month, more restaurants found Jake's website. He started getting regular orders from 3 restaurants in Dallas and 2 in Austin. The extra money he was making allowed him to pay off some debts and make improvements to his ranch. Other people in town started to notice Jake's success. Bill Crawford, the rancher who had been thinking about selling his land, came to the diner to talk to Sarah. "I heard about what you did for Jake," Bill said. "Think you could help me too?" Sarah was happy to help. Bill's ranch was smaller than Jake's, but his cattle were just as good. Sarah created a website for Bill and helped him connect with restaurants that wanted beef from smaller, family-owned ranches. Soon, Bill was also selling his beef for much higher prices than he had ever gotten before. He decided not to sell his land after all. Word about Sarah's success with the ranchers spread to other business owners in town. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop asked if Sarah could help her sell flowers to people outside of Dusthart. "I grow the most beautiful roses you've ever seen," Mrs. Henderson said. "But there are only so many people in this town who buy flowers." Sarah visited Mrs. Henderson's greenhouse and was amazed by what she saw. Mrs. Henderson grew dozens of different types of flowers, and they were all beautiful. She had roses, sunflowers, lilac, and many other flowers that Sarah could not even name. "These are incredible," Sarah told Mrs. Henderson. "People in the city pay a lot of money for flowers like these." Sarah helped Mrs. Henderson set up an online store where she could sell flowers to customers all over Texas. She took pictures of the most beautiful arrangements and wrote descriptions that explained how Mrs. Henderson grew her flowers with care and attention. Within 2 weeks, Mrs. Henderson got her first online order. A woman in Houston wanted flowers for her daughter's wedding. She had seen Mrs. Henderson's website and loved the fact that the flowers were grown by a real person, not a big flower company. Mrs. Henderson was so excited that she cried when she told Sarah about the order. "I never thought anyone outside of Dusthart would want my flowers," she said. Next, Charlie, the furniture maker, heard about what Sarah was doing for other people. He came to her with an old table he had made from wood that came from a tree on his own property. "My grandfather planted this tree in 1920, Charlie told Sarah. "I cut it down last year because it was dying, but I couldn't bear to throw the wood away, so I made this table." The table was beautiful. It was simple but elegant, and you could see the love and skill that Charlie had put into making it. Sarah knew that people in the city would pay a lot of money for a table with such a special story. Sarah helped Charlie take pictures of his furniture and set up a website where he could sell his handmade pieces. She wrote about how Charlie used wood from trees on his own land and how each piece of furniture was unique. Charlie's first sale was a dining room table that he sold to a family in San Antonio for $2,000. It was more money than Charlie had made in the past 6 months combined. As more and more people in Dusthart started to see success with their businesses, Sarah decided it was time to think bigger. She had an idea for something that could help the whole town at once. Sarah proposed organizing the first annual Dusthart Days Festival. It would be a weekend event where people from other towns could come to Dusthart to see what the town had to offer. "We could have Jake and the other ranchers give tours of their ranches," Sarah explained to Betty. "Mrs. Henderson could sell flowers and Charlie could display his furniture. We could have local musicians play music and you could serve your famous barbecue." Betty liked the idea, but she was worried. "Do you think people would really drive all the way out here just to see our little town?" "I think they would," Sarah said. "City people are always looking for authentic experiences. They want to see real ranch life and meet real cowboys." Sarah talked to Jake about the festival idea. At first, he was not sure. "I don't know if I want a bunch of strangers walking around my ranch," Jake said. "Think of it as a way to show potential customers what you do," Sarah said. "If restaurant owners could see your ranch in person, they might be more likely to buy from you." Jake thought about this and decided it was worth trying. He agreed to give ranch tours during the festival. Sarah spent weeks planning the festival. She made flyers and posted information on social media. She contacted newspapers in nearby cities and asked them to write about the event. She also worked with the town council to get permission for the festival and to make sure there would be enough parking and bathrooms for visitors. The festival was scheduled for the first weekend in October. As the date got closer, Sarah started to worry that no one would come. What if all her work was for nothing? But her worries were unnecessary. The weekend of the festival, more than 500 people came to Dust Heart. They came from Dallas, Austin, Houston, and many smaller towns in between. The visitors loved everything about the festival. They took tours of Jake's ranch and learned about cattle ranching. They bought flowers from Mrs. Henderson and furniture from Charlie. They ate Betty's barbecue and listened to local musicians play country songs. Many of the visitors said they had never seen anything like Dust Heart. They loved the friendly people and the beautiful countryside. Some of them asked if they could come back for another visit. The festival was such a success that the visitors spent more than $20,000 in Dust Heart during that one weekend. Local businesses sold more in 2 days than they usually sold in 2 months, but not everyone in town was happy about the festival. Some of the older residents thought it was too much change too fast. They worried that bringing outsiders to town would change the character of Dust Heart. Earl Thompson, who owned a small ranch on the edge of town, was one of the people who was not happy. He came to the diner the Monday after the festival to complain. "This town is turning into a circus," Earl told Sarah. "All those city people walking around, taking pictures of everything. This isn't what Dust Heart is supposed to be about." Sarah listened to Earl's complaints respectfully. She could understand why some people were worried about change. "I respect your concerns, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said. "But I think we can bring visitors to town without losing what makes Dust Heart special. The people who came to the festival loved our town because it's real and authentic." Earl shook his head. "Mark my words, girl. This is going to ruin everything that's good about this place." Sarah hoped Earl was wrong, but she could see that not everyone in town was ready to embrace the changes she was helping to create. She knew that she would have to be careful to show people that growth and change did not have to mean losing the things that made Dust Heart a special place to live. Despite the complaints from some people, most of the town was excited about the festival's success. The business owners who had participated were already making plans for next year's festival. Jake came to the diner a few days after the festival to thank Sarah again. "I gave tours to more than 100 people," he said, "and I got business cards from 5 restaurant owners who want to buy my beef." Sarah was happy to see Jake so excited about his business, but she was even happier to see that he was starting to feel proud of his ranch and his work again. "You've helped me see my ranch through new eyes," Jake told Sarah. "I forgot how special this place really is." Sarah smiled. "I didn't change anything about your ranch, Jake. I just helped other people see what was already there." As Sarah looked around the diner that evening, she felt proud of what she had accomplished in Dust Heart. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. There was still a lot of work to do if they wanted to make sure the town continued to grow and thrive. The trouble started 2 weeks after the Dust Heart Days festival. Sarah was working the morning shift at the diner when Earl Thompson came in with 3 other men. They all looked serious and angry. Earl sat down at a table near the front of the diner where everyone could see him. The other men sat with him. Sarah could tell they were there for more than just breakfast. "Coffee?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice friendly. "Just coffee," Earl said coldly. "We need to talk to some folks." As the morning went on, more people came into the diner. Sarah noticed that Earl was talking quietly to each person who came in. She could not hear what he was saying, but she could see that some people were nodding and looking concerned. Jake Morrison came in around 10 o'clock for his usual coffee. Earl immediately called him over to his table. "Jake, we need to talk," Earl said loudly enough for everyone in the diner to hear. "About what's happening to our town." Jake looked uncomfortable. "What do you mean, Earl?" "I mean all these changes that girl has been making," Earl said, pointing at Sarah. "Bringing city people here, putting our business on the internet, making us look like some kind of tourist attraction." Sarah felt her face turn red, but she kept working. She did not want to get into an argument with Earl in front of the whole diner. "Sarah has helped a lot of us make more money," Jake said quietly. "I don't see the problem with that." "The problem is that we're losing who we are," Earl said, raising his voice. "This town was built by people who worked hard and minded their own business. We didn't need outsiders telling us how to live. Other people in the diner started to pay attention to the conversation. Sarah could see that some of them were nodding in agreement with Earl. "She's been here less than a year," said Mrs. Patterson, who ran the post office. "What gives her the right to change everything about our town?" Sarah wanted to speak up for herself, but Betty caught her eye and shook her head slightly. Betty was warning Sarah to stay quiet and let other people defend her, but Jake was not staying quiet. "Sarah hasn't changed anything about who we are," he said. "She just helped us find new ways to make a living. My ranch is still the same ranch my great-grandfather built. I'm still raising cattle the same way my family always has. But now you've got strangers coming out to your ranch, taking pictures, treating it like some kind of show," Earl argued. "That's not what ranching is about." Bill Crawford, who had also benefited from Sarah's help, spoke up. "Earl, I was about to lose my ranch before Sarah helped me. Now I'm making enough money to keep going. How is that bad for our town?" Earl turned to look at Bill. "You're selling out, Bill. We all are. Pretty soon this place will be nothing but a fake cowboy town for tourists." The argument continued for another hour. People took sides, and the friendly atmosphere of the diner became tense and uncomfortable. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but she could hear every word. Some people supported Sarah and the changes she had helped bring to town. They pointed out that businesses were doing better and that young people might have reasons to stay in Dusthart now, but other people agreed with Earl. They worried that the town was changing too fast and that outsiders would take over their community. Finally, Earl stood up and spoke to the whole diner. "I'm calling for a town meeting," he announced. "It's time for all of us to decide what kind of town we want Dusthart to be." After Earl and his supporters left, the diner was quiet. Sarah felt terrible. She had come to Dusthart to find work and build a new life. She never intended to cause problems or divide the community. Betty came over to Sarah and put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't let them get to you, honey," Betty said softly. "Change is always hard for some people." "Maybe Earl is right," Sarah said sadly. "Maybe I shouldn't have tried to change things." "You didn't change things," Jake said. "He had stayed behind after Earl left. You just helped us see possibilities we didn't know existed." But Sarah was not comforted. She could see that the town was now divided because of her actions. Some people supported her, but others wanted her to leave. The town meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday night at the community center. As the week went on, Sarah could feel the tension in the air. People were choosing sides, and friends were arguing with friends. Sarah heard rumors that Earl was organizing a petition to limit outside business influences in Dusthart. He wanted the town council to pass rules that would make it harder for people like Sarah to help local businesses. Some of the business owners who had worked with Sarah became nervous. They worried that if they continued to support her, they would lose customers who agreed with Earl. Charlie, the furniture maker, stopped coming to the diner. Mrs. Henderson looked worried every time Sarah saw her. Even Bill Crawford seemed less friendly than before. Sarah began to think that maybe she should leave Dusthart. She had saved some money from her work at the diner, and she could probably find another job in a different town. Maybe it would be better for everyone if she just disappeared, but Jake would not let her give up. "You can't leave now," he told her. "The people who support you need to see that you're not going to run away when things get difficult." "But I'm causing problems for the town," Sarah said. "Maybe Earl is right. Maybe I don't have the right to come here and suggest changes." "Earl is scared," Jake said. "He's seen other small towns die, and he thinks that any change will lead to the end of our way of life. But he's wrong. Without change, Dusthart really will die." The night of the town meeting, Sarah was so nervous she could barely eat dinner. Betty tried to reassure her, but Sarah knew that her future in Dusthart would be decided by what happened at the meeting. The community center was packed. Sarah had never seen so many people in one place in Dusthart. She sat in the back with Betty, Jake, and a few other supporters. Earl Thompson stood up first to speak. He talked about the history of Dusthart and the values that the town was founded on. He said that the recent changes were threatening to destroy the character of the community. "We don't need outsiders telling us how to run our businesses, Earl," sighed, looking directly at Sarah. This girl has been here less than a year, but she thinks she knows better than people who have lived here their whole lives. Several people in the audience clapped when Earl finished speaking. Then Jake stood up to defend Sarah. He talked about how she had helped him save his ranch and how other businesses in town were also doing better because of her help. Sarah didn't force anyone to change, Jake said. She just offered to help, and people chose to accept that help. The results speak for themselves. Other people spoke on both sides of the issue. The meeting went on for 2 hours, and the arguments became more heated as the night went on. Finally, the mayor called for quiet. "We need to vote on Earl's proposal to limit outside business consulting in our town," he said. Sarah held her breath as the vote was taken. When it was over, Earl's proposal had passed by a narrow margin. The town council would create new rules. That would make it much harder for Sarah to help local businesses. As people filed out of the community center, Sarah felt defeated. She had tried to help Dusthart, but the town had rejected her efforts. Earl Thompson stopped next to Sarah as he was leaving. "Nothing personal, girl," he said, "but this town needs to stay true to what it is." Sarah nodded, but she did not trust herself to speak. She felt like crying, but she did not want to break down in front of everyone. Jake walked Sarah and Betty back to the diner. "This isn't over," he told Sarah. "People will come around when they see that Earl's way leads nowhere." But Sarah was not sure she believed him. It seemed like her time in Dusthart was coming to an end just when she had started to feel like she really belonged there. That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about what she should do next. She could stay and fight for her ideas, but that might just cause more problems for the town. Or she could leave and let Dusthart go back to the way it was before she arrived. Neither choice seemed right. Sarah had grown to love Dusthart and its people. She did not want to leave, but she also did not want to be the cause of conflict in a community that had welcomed her when she had nothing. As Sarah finally fell asleep, she hoped that somehow there would be a way to solve the town's problems without tearing the community apart. Sarah had been thinking about leaving Dusthart for 3 days when the crisis hit. She was working the morning shift at the diner when Jake Morrison burst through the door. His face was pale and his clothes were covered with dust. "Betty, I need to use your phone," Jake said urgently. "My cell phone isn't working out at the ranch. What's wrong?" Betty asked, handing him the phone from behind the counter. "The well is almost dry," Jake said as he dialed a number. "We haven't had rain in 2 months, and the creek is just a trickle. If we don't find water soon, I'm going to lose half my cattle." Sarah stopped wiping tables and listened. She had noticed that the weather had been very dry lately, but she did not realize how serious the problem was. Jake made several phone calls, trying to find someone who could drill a new well. But every company he called said they were already booked for months. The drought was affecting ranches all over Texas, and everyone needed water. After Jake hung up the phone, he sat down heavily at the counter. "I don't know what I'm going to do," he said. "I can't afford to lose those cattle. How bad is it?" Sarah asked. Jake looked at her with tired eyes. "Bad, real bad, and it's not just me. Bill Crawford called this morning. His pond is almost empty. 2. Earl Thompson's having the same problem." Over the next few hours, more ranchers came into the diner with the same story. The drought was worse than anyone had realized, and it was happening fast. Wells that had provided water for decades were running dry. Sarah listened to all the conversations, and she started to see the bigger picture. The ranchers were all facing the same problem, but they were all trying to solve it separately. Each one was competing with the others to find water sources and drilling companies. That evening, Sarah was closing the diner when she had an idea. Instead of each rancher trying to solve the water problem alone, what if they worked together? The next morning, Sarah asked Betty if she could use the diner for a meeting after closing time. "What kind of meeting?" Betty asked. "I want to invite all the ranchers to come and talk about the water problem," Sarah said. "Maybe if they work together, they can find a solution that helps everyone." Betty looked doubtful. "Honey, ranchers around here don't usually work together. They're independent people." But this problem is bigger than any one ranch, Sarah said. And after what happened at the town meeting, maybe people will see that I'm trying to help, not hurt the community. Betty agreed to let Sarah use the diner for the meeting. Sarah spent the day visiting every ranch in the area, inviting the owners to come that evening. Most of the ranchers were polite but skeptical. Earl Thompson was not polite at all. "I'm not interested in any more of your city ideas," Earl told Sarah when she came to his ranch. "We've been handling problems like this for 100 years without help from outsiders." But Jake Morrison supported Sarah's idea. "Earl, we're all facing the same problem," he said. "Maybe it makes sense to hear what everyone else is doing." That evening, 12 ranchers came to the meeting at the diner. Sarah was surprised that so many showed up, including some who had voted against her at the town meeting. Sarah stood in front of the group and tried to keep her voice steady. "I know some of you don't want to hear ideas from me," she said. "But I've been listening to all of you talk about the water problem, and I think there might be a way to help everyone." Earl Thompson crossed his arms and looked skeptical, but he did not leave. Sarah continued. "Each of you is trying to find water and hire drilling companies on your own. But what if you worked together? What if you shared the cost of drilling several wells and shared the water?" "Share water?" asked Bill Crawford. "How would that work?" Sarah had spent hours thinking about this. "You could form a cooperative. Each rancher would contribute money based on how much water they need. The cooperative would hire drilling companies to dig wells in the best locations. Then you would share the water from all the wells." The ranchers looked at each other uncertainly. They were not used to working together on such a big project. "There are other benefits too," Sarah said. "If you work as a group, you could get better prices on feed and supplies. You could share the cost of equipment that each ranch only uses occasionally. And you could market your beef together, which would give you more power when negotiating with buyers." Jake Morrison spoke up. "It makes sense to me. We're all facing the same challenges. Why should we compete with each other when we could help each other?" Earl Thompson shook his head. "This sounds like another one of your schemes to change our way of life," he said to Sarah. "No, sir," Sarah replied respectfully. "This is about saving your way of life. If half the ranches in this area go out of business because of the drought, what happens to Dusthart?" The room was quiet as the ranchers thought about this. Bill Crawford broke the silence. "She's right, Earl. If my ranch fails, your ranch loses. A neighbor, if enough of us fail, the whole community fails." Over the next 2 hours, the ranchers discussed Sarah's idea. Slowly, they began to see how working together could help all of them. Jake Morrison offered to let the cooperative dig the first well on his land, near the creek where the soil was most likely to hold water. Bill Crawford said he could contribute a truck for hauling water if needed. Even some of the ranchers who had been skeptical started to offer help. Finally, Earl Thompson spoke up. "I still don't like the idea of outsiders telling us how to run our businesses," he said. "But I like the idea of losing my ranch even less." The ranchers agreed to form the Dusthart Ranchers Cooperative. They would pool their money to hire a drilling company and share whatever water they found. Sarah helped them figure out how much each ranch should contribute and how they would divide the water fairly. Within a week, the cooperative had raised enough money to hire a drilling company from Austin. The company agreed to start work immediately. Because they were dealing with such a large order, the first well they drilled hit water at 60 feet. It was not a huge amount of water, but it was enough to help several ranches get through the drought. The second well was even better, providing clean water that could be shared among all the cooperative members. As the water crisis was being solved, something else important happened. The ranchers who had been forced to work together started to see the benefits of cooperation in other areas too. Earl Thompson, who had been the most resistant to change, was the first to suggest that the cooperative should buy feed in bulk to get better prices. "If we're already working together on water," he said, "we might as well work together on everything else." The cooperative grew quickly. The ranchers started sharing equipment, buying supplies together, and even marketing their beef as a group. They called their beef Dusthart Valley Beef and sold it as a premium product from a group of family ranches. A month after the water crisis began, Jake Morrison came to the diner to find Sarah. "I have something to tell you," he said with a big smile on his face. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "We just got the biggest order in the history of the cooperative," Jake said. "A restaurant chain in Houston wants to buy beef from us every month for the next year. They're willing to pay premium prices because they like the story of how we work together as a community." Sarah felt tears come to her eyes. "That's wonderful, Jake." "It's more than wonderful," Jake said. "It's going to save every ranch in the cooperative." The success of the cooperative changed how people in Dusthart felt about Sarah. Even some of the people who had voted against her at the town meeting started to see that her ideas were helping the community, not hurting it. Earl Thompson came to the diner one evening to talk to Sarah privately. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I was wrong about you." "You don't need to apologize, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said. "You were protecting something you care about." "Maybe so," Earl said. "But I was also being stubborn and foolish. You've helped save ranches that have been in families for generations. That's not destroying our way of life. That's preserving it." The water crisis had brought the community together in a way that Sarah never could have planned. People who had been arguing about change were now working together to solve real problems. Betty watched all of this with pride. "You know what you've done, don't you?" she asked Sarah one evening as they closed the diner. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "You've shown this town that change doesn't have to mean losing what's important," Betty said. "You've helped people see that they can honor their traditions while still finding new ways to thrive." Sarah looked around the diner, which had become her home and her workplace. She thought about how scared she had been when she first arrived in Dusthart. Asking if there was any work for her. Now she realized that the work she had found was not just serving food at a diner. Her real work was helping a community discover its own strength and potential. The drought had been a crisis, but it had also been an opportunity. It had forced people to work together and to see that cooperation could make them all stronger. Sarah was no longer an outsider in Dusthart. She was part of the community, and the community was stronger because she was there. 2 years after Sarah Martinez had stepped off the bus in Dusthart with $47 in her pocket, she stood on the main street looking at a town that was completely transformed. But the changes were not the kind that destroyed what made Dusthart special. Instead, they had made the town stronger while keeping everything that the people loved about their home. The main street, which had been mostly empty when Sarah first arrived, was now busy with activity. The hardware store that had been struggling to stay open was now thriving. Mr. Peterson had hired 2 part-time employees to help him keep up with all the business from the ranchers' cooperative and the growing number of visitors who came to town. Mrs. Henderson's flower shop had expanded into the empty building next door. She now employed 3 people and shipped flowers all over Texas. Her online business had grown so much that she was thinking about opening a second greenhouse. Charlie's furniture workshop had also grown. He had moved to a larger building on the edge of town where he had room for the woodworking equipment he needed to keep up with all his orders. His handmade furniture was now sold in stores in Dallas and Austin, and he had a waiting list of customers who wanted pieces made from trees that grew on Texas ranches. But the biggest change was in the ranching community. The Dusthart Ranchers Cooperative had grown to include 15 ranches. They had solved their water problems by drilling 6 wells that provided enough water for all the member ranches. They had also built a small processing facility where they could prepare their beef for restaurants and stores. The cooperative was now selling Dusthart Valley beef to restaurants in 5 cities. The beef was famous for its quality and for the story of how it was produced by a group of family ranches that had worked together to survive and thrive. Jake Morrison had been elected president of the cooperative for the 2nd year in a row. His ranch was doing better than it had ever done, and he had been able to hire 2 full-time workers. More importantly, he was proud of his work again. Sarah had also changed during her 2 years in Dusthart. She was no longer the scared young woman who had lost her job and had nowhere to go. She was now confident and respected in the community. She had been elected to the town council. and people often came to her for advice about their businesses. Sarah still worked at Betty's diner, but now she was the manager. Betty had decided to work fewer hours and let Sarah handle more of the day-to-day operations. The diner was busier than ever, serving both locals and the steady stream of visitors who came to Dust Heart. The second annual Dust Heart Days festival had been even more successful than the first. More than 1,000 people had come to town for the weekend event. They toured the ranches, bought local products, and learned about life in a real Texas cowboy town. But the festival was careful to maintain the authentic character of Dust Heart. There were no fake decorations or artificial attractions. Visitors came to see real ranchers doing real work and to learn about the history and traditions of the area. The success of the festival and the cooperative had brought new people to Dust Heart. 3 young families had moved to town in the past year, attracted by the opportunity to work for the cooperative or to start their own businesses. The school, which had been in danger of closing, now had enough students to hire a second teacher. The bank had decided not to close its branch after all. In fact, they had expanded their services to help other small towns that wanted to follow Dust Heart's example. Sarah's personal life had also changed. She and Jake Morrison had been dating for over a year, and everyone in town expected them to get married soon. Sarah had never imagined that she would fall in love with a cowboy, but Jake was kind, hardworking, and shared her vision for what Dust Heart could become. One evening in early fall, Sarah and Jake sat on the porch of the Morrison ranch house, watching the sunset over the pastures where healthy cattle grazed on good grass. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come to Dust Heart?" Jake asked. Sarah smiled. "I think about what would have happened if I hadn't asked Betty for work that first day. I was so scared that she would say no." "She almost did," Jake said. "Betty told me later that she wasn't sure about hiring someone from the city. But she said there was something in your eyes that reminded her of herself when she was young." "I'm glad she took a chance on me," Sarah said. "This town saved my life in more ways than one." Jake took Sarah's hand. "You saved this town too. When you first got here, people were just waiting for Dust Heart to die. Now they're planning for the future." Sarah thought about all the changes that had happened since she arrived. The town had grown from 800 people to almost 1,000. New businesses were opening and old businesses were thriving. Young people were staying in town instead of leaving for the cities, but the most important change was in the attitude of the people. They had stopped seeing themselves as victims of economic forces beyond their control. Now they saw themselves as partners working together to build something better. Even Earl Thompson, who had been Sarah's strongest opponent, had become one of her supporters. He was now the treasurer of the Ranchers Cooperative and often praised Sarah for having the courage to suggest new ideas. "I was wrong to fight against change," Earl had told Sarah recently. "I thought change meant losing what we valued. But you showed us that the right kind of change can help us protect what we value." The transformation of Dust Heart had not gone unnoticed outside the town. A magazine had written an article about how the small Texas town had revitalized itself while maintaining its authentic character. A university had sent researchers to study how the Ranchers Cooperative worked. Other small towns were asking for advice about how to follow Dust Heart's example. Sarah had been invited to speak at conferences about rural economic development. But she always made it clear that the success of Dust Heart was not because of any one person's ideas. It was because the people of the town had been willing to work together and try new approaches while staying true to their values. As Sarah sat on the porch with Jake, she thought about the future. The town still faced challenges, but now people approached problems with confidence instead of fear. They knew that by working together, they could find solutions to almost any difficulty. Sarah had also been thinking about starting a consulting business to help other small towns. She had learned so much in Dust Heart about what worked and what didn't work. Maybe she could help other communities find their own paths to success. But whatever the future held, Sarah knew that Dust Heart would always be her home. This was the place where she had learned that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but the beginning of strength. This was where she had discovered that one person with good ideas and the willingness to work hard could make a difference. In an entire community, the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah could see lights coming on in the houses of town, where families were sitting down to dinner and talking about their day. "I love this place," Sarah said to Jake. "I love the people, the land, the way everyone cares about each other." "Even when they disagree with each other?" Jake asked with a smile, remembering the conflicts of the past. "Especially then," Sarah said, "because even when people disagreed, they still cared enough to fight for what they believed in. That passion is what made it possible to find solutions that worked for everyone." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah thought about the scared young woman who had gotten off the bus 2 years ago and asked if there was work in Dust Heart. That woman had been looking for a job, but she had found so much more. She had found a home, a community, a purpose, and love. She had also found out that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined. The question, "Is there work here?" had been answered in ways that Sarah never could have predicted. Yes, there was work in Dust Heart. There was the work of building relationships, solving problems, bringing people together, and helping a community discover its own potential. And that work would continue for years to come, as Dust Heart grew and changed while always remaining true to the values and traditions that made it special. Sarah squeezed Jake's hand and smiled as she watched the lights of her town twinkling in the valley below. She had found her place in the world, and she had helped others find theirs too. It had all started with a simple question, but it had led to a life she never could have imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. Sarah was ready for both. She had learned that with hard work, good friends, and a willingness to try new things, almost anything was possible. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the sound of cattle moving in the pasture and the distant hum of activity from the town. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of her home. They were the sounds of a community that was alive and growing, but still connected to the land and traditions that had always defined it. When Sarah opened her eyes, Jake was looking at her with a question in his expression. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how grateful I am," Sarah said. "When I got off that bus, I thought I was at the end of something. I had lost my job, my apartment, everything I thought I wanted, but really I was at the beginning of the best part of my life.